The brutal truth about healing an avoidant partner is that you can't. Their attachment wounds are theirs to heal. Their trauma is theirs to process, and their growth is their responsibility to pursue or avoid. No amount of your love, patience, understanding, or perfect behavior can force someone to confront their patterns, do their internal work, or choose vulnerability over the safety of emotional distance. But what you can do is create conditions that make healing feel possible rather than threatening. Model security they've never experienced and become the kind of presence that challenges their beliefs about relationships being dangerous while respecting that transformation is ultimately their choice. Every well-intentioned strategy that focuses on fixing, changing, or healing your avoidant partner is doomed to fail because it positions you as their therapist rather than their partner. It makes their growth your project rather than their journey, and paradoxically creates the very pressure and overwhelm that triggers their avoidance patterns. The more you try to heal them, the more they'll resist your efforts because their trauma interprets your healing attempts as evidence that you find them broken, unacceptable, or in need of repair to deserve your love. The strategies that actually create conditions for avoidant healing look nothing like traditional relationship advice suggests. They don't involve more communication about feelings, deeper discussions about their childhood wounds, or patient waiting while they work on themselves at their own pace. Instead, they require you to focus on your own security. Maintain boundaries that protect your well-being and become so grounded in your own worth that their patterns can't destabilize you, creating the exact conditions their nervous system needs to begin questioning whether their avoidance actually serves them. Understanding what creates healing conditions versus what prevents growth is crucial because the line between supporting someone's development and enabling their dysfunction is razor thin with avoidance. Your compassion for their trauma can easily become permission for their continued emotional unavailability. Your patience with their process can transform into acceptance of treatment that damages your own well-being. Your hope that love will heal them can blind you to the reality that they're not actually doing any work toward change. The hardest truth about creating conditions for avoidant healing is that the most loving thing you can do might be walking away. Removing yourself from their life so completely that they're forced to confront the pattern of their own relationship destruction without your continued presence, enabling their avoidance. Sometimes the catalyst they need isn't your perfect understanding of their attachment style, but the devastating loss of someone who loved them despite their limitations and chose to stop accepting the crumbs their trauma allowed them to offer. The foundation: you can't heal them, but you can create safety. The first and most important reality to accept is that you are not responsible for healing your avoidant partner's attachment wounds. You cannot love them into emotional availability and will destroy both the relationship and yourself if you make their psychological healing your primary relationship project. Their attachment trauma developed over years or decades through experiences that have nothing to do with you, and healing requires professional therapeutic intervention combined with their own committed internal work, not your patient accommodation of their dysfunctional patterns. What you can do, the only thing you can actually control, is create an environment of emotional safety that makes examining their patterns feel less threatening than maintaining them. This safety doesn't come from walking on eggshells around their triggers, accepting their emotional unavailability without complaint, or becoming the perfectly understanding partner who never has needs that inconvenience them. Real safety comes from you being so secure in yourself that their patterns can't shake you, so clear in your boundaries that they know exactly where they stand, and so committed to your own well-being that their growth becomes optional rather than essential to your happiness. The secure base you provide isn't about being endlessly available for their emotional needs while yours go unmet. It's about demonstrating through your own behavior what secure attachment actually looks like. This means you regulate your own emotions without requiring their participation, maintain your own life and interests regardless of their availability, and show consistent care without becoming dependent on their reciprocation for your sense of worth or relationship security. Creating conditions for healing requires you to stop doing the emotional labor of analyzing their patterns, explaining their behavior to yourself, or making excuses for their limitations. When you stop focusing your energy on understanding and accommodating their avoidance, you create space for them to start examining their own patterns rather than relying on you to do that work for them while they remain comfortably unchanged. The foundation of healing conditions includes you refusing to participate in their avoidant games, not pursuing when they withdraw, not overcompensating when they're distant, not performing relationship maintenance for both of you while they coast on your efforts. When you stop playing your assigned role in their avoidant dance, they're forced to either step up and engage differently or watch the relationship fail due to their own inaction rather than your supposed neediness. Your role isn't to teach them about attachment theory, recommend therapists, or guide them through their healing process. Your role is to be so grounded in your own secure attachment that you naturally model what healthy relationship looks like: direct communication, emotional honesty, consistent care balanced with healthy boundaries, and the ability to be both independent and intimate without those needs conflicting. Creating safety paradoxically requires you to stop making their comfort your primary concern and start prioritizing your own emotional well-being with the same energy you've been investing in managing their triggers and accommodating their limitations. When they see you valuing yourself appropriately, maintaining your standards, and choosing your peace over their comfort, they begin to understand that healthy relationships require mutual effort rather than one person's endless accommodation. The most important aspect of creating healing conditions is accepting that you cannot make someone ready to heal, cannot force someone to examine their patterns, and cannot love someone into doing work they're not willing to do for themselves. Your job is to create conditions where healing becomes possible, not to ensure it happens, control the timeline, or take responsibility for outcomes that are fundamentally about their choices rather than your strategies. Stop chasing the power of secure presence over pursuit. The single most powerful thing you can do to create conditions for avoidant healing is to completely stop pursuing them when they withdraw. Stop analyzing their behavior for hidden meanings, and stop trying to maintain connection through your effort alone. Every time you chase their withdrawal, you confirm their core belief that relationships are overwhelming and that people want too much from them, reinforcing the exact patterns you're hoping they'll examine and change through your patient understanding. Your pursuit, no matter how loving, patient, or well-intentioned, triggers their nervous system's threat response because it mirrors the childhood experiences that created their avoidant attachment in the first place. When caregivers were inconsistent, overwhelming, or invasive with their attention, the developing child learned that other people's needs and emotions feel dangerous and require defensive distance. Your chasing reactivates this trauma response, making you feel like the threat they need to escape rather than the safe person they could learn to trust. The secure presence that actually creates healing conditions looks radically different from pursuit. It involves you remaining warm and available when they engage while completely accepting their withdrawal without taking it personally, analyzing it obsessively, or trying to force reconnection before they're ready. This means when they pull away, you simply continue living your full life with the same energy and satisfaction you had before their distance, demonstrating that your well-being doesn't depend on their emotional availability. Watch what happens to their nervous system when you stop chasing. The pressure that triggered their flight response disappears, creating space for them to actually feel your absence rather than simply feel relief from relationship demands. When you're not pursuing, they can't blame their distance on your neediness or use your anxiety as justification for their withdrawal. They're forced to sit with their own patterns without your pursuit providing the distraction and validation that keeps them comfortable in their avoidance. Secure presence means you respond warmly when they reach out, but don't initiate contact when they're in withdrawal mode. You remain open to connection when they're available, but build your own fulfilling life when they're not. And you treat their patterns as information about their capacity rather than problems you need to solve through perfect understanding and accommodation. This approach removes the reward system that makes their avoidance work. They can no longer get consistent attention and relationship benefits while maintaining emotional distance. The magnetic pull of someone who doesn't need them to change is far more powerful than the pressure of someone trying to heal them. When you demonstrate through your behavior that you're fine whether they show up or not, interested but not desperate, available but not waiting, you become the first person in their life whose presence doesn't feel like a demand for emotional labor they can't provide. This lack of pressure creates the psychological safety where examining their patterns becomes possible rather than threatening. Stopping the chase requires you to genuinely detach from the outcome of their healing journey, releasing your investment in whether they grow, change, or become emotionally available enough to meet your needs. This detachment isn't cold or punishing. It's the recognition that their healing is their responsibility and that your happiness cannot depend on their psychological transformation occurring on your preferred timeline. Your secure presence includes you making decisions about your own life and happiness without waiting for their participation or approval, pursuing your goals, maintaining your friendships, building your career, and creating fulfillment that exists completely independent of their emotional availability or relationship status. When they see you thriving without needing them to be different, they're confronted with the reality that their avoidance might cost them someone who doesn't actually need them, but chooses them anyway. The power of not chasing extends to you refusing to do their emotional work for them, not explaining their patterns to them, not recommending resources for their healing, not managing their therapy journey or self-improvement process. When you stop being their emotional project manager, they're forced to take ownership of their own growth or accept that their patterns will continue destroying their relationships without your intervention, saving them from consequences. The most transformative aspect of secure presence over pursuit is that it forces them to experience genuine consequences of their avoidant patterns rather than having those consequences buffered by your endless patience and pursuit. When they withdraw and you don't chase, they experience actual distance rather than the pseudo-distance that comes from pulling away from someone who immediately pursues. This authentic experience of their own patterns creates the discomfort that might eventually motivate change rather than the comfortable dynamic where they get space while you do all the relationship work. Model security, become what they never experienced. The most powerful healing condition you can create doesn't come from understanding their attachment trauma or accommodating their limitations. It comes from embodying secure attachment so consistently and naturally that you become living proof that their core beliefs about relationships being dangerous, people being unreliable, and vulnerability leading to devastation aren't universal truths, but trauma-based distortions that don't apply to everyone they might love. Your secure attachment modeling begins with how you handle your own emotions, regulating yourself without requiring their participation, processing your feelings through your own resources and support systems, and demonstrating that emotional experiences are manageable rather than overwhelming catastrophes requiring someone else to fix or prevent. When they watch you navigate difficult emotions without falling apart or requiring them to rescue you, they see evidence that feelings aren't the dangerous threats their trauma taught them to avoid. The consistency you demonstrate becomes the antidote to their childhood experience of unreliable caregiving, where love was conditional, attention was unpredictable, and safety was temporary. When you show up with the same warmth and care, whether they're being their best or worst self, whether the relationship is easy or challenging, whether they're meeting your needs or struggling with their limitations, you provide their nervous system with repeated experiences that contradict their belief that people's love is conditional and temporary. Your emotional honesty and direct communication model a relationship style they've never encountered, where feelings are expressed clearly without manipulation, needs are stated directly without expecting them to read your mind, and conflicts are addressed openly rather than avoided or turned into emotional warfare. When you can say, I felt hurt when you canceled our plans last minute without making it a character assassination or guilt trip, you demonstrate that emotional honesty doesn't have to be dangerous or overwhelming. The boundaries you maintain with calm firmness teach them that healthy relationships include limits, that caring for someone doesn't mean accepting all their behavior, and that people can enforce standards while still being loving and safe. When you say, I need 24 hours notice for plan changes, or I'll make other arrangements, and actually follow through without anger or punishment, you show them that boundaries create structure and safety rather than conflict and control. Your independence and full life model that healthy relationships don't require enmeshment, that partners can maintain separate identities and interests while still being deeply connected, and that love doesn't mean losing yourself in someone else. When they see you pursuing your own goals with passion, maintaining meaningful friendships, and finding fulfillment in areas that don't include them, you demonstrate the balanced autonomy and intimacy that their trauma taught them was impossible. The way you handle their avoidant patterns reveals whether secure attachment actually exists. When you can remain calm and centered during their withdrawal without chasing or punishing, when you can give space without taking their need for distance personally, when you can welcome their return without making it about how their absence affected you, you prove that someone can love them without being destabilized by their patterns. Your modeling extends to how you handle conflict and repair, addressing issues directly without storing resentment, working through disagreements without making them relationship-ending catastrophes, and moving forward after resolution without holding past conflicts as ongoing evidence of relationship failure. When they experience conflict with you that gets resolved rather than avoided or exploded, they learn that relationship challenges don't have to mean relationship destruction. The secure base you provide through your own attachment security demonstrates that people can be both reliable and not suffocating, both caring and not demanding, both present and not invasive. Your existence in their life challenges every core belief their trauma created about what loving someone requires and what being loved feels like, creating cognitive dissonance that might eventually motivate them to question whether their avoidant patterns actually protect them or just keep them isolated. Your consistent grounded presence over time becomes the most powerful intervention possible because you're not telling them that secure attachment exists. You're showing them through lived experience that someone can remain stable and loving through their patterns, that emotional safety is possible with the right person, and that vulnerability doesn't always lead to the abandonment or engulfment their trauma predicts. This modeling plants seeds that might take months or years to germinate, but creates possibilities for healing that lectures about attachment theory never could. Boundaries are medicine. How limits create safety. The counterintuitive truth about creating healing conditions for avoidance is that clear, consistently enforced boundaries help them far more than endless patience and accommodation ever could. When you maintain firm limits about what you will and won't accept, you're providing the structure and predictability their chaotic early attachment experiences never offered, teaching them through experience that healthy relationships include standards, consequences, and mutual respect rather than one person's unlimited tolerance for poor treatment. Your boundaries serve as medicine because they force the avoidant to confront the actual consequences of their patterns rather than being buffered from those consequences by your continued acceptance and pursuit. When you say, I won't accept last-minute cancellations, and actually enforce that limit by making other plans, when they flake, they experience real accountability for their behavior instead of the pseudo-accountability that comes from you expressing disappointment while continuing to accommodate their inconsistency. The clarity of your boundaries eliminates the ambiguity that allows avoidance to remain comfortable in their dysfunction. When they know exactly what you will and won't accept, they can no longer hide behind confusion about your needs or claim they didn't know their behavior was problematic. Your clear limits make their choices simple. Either meet your standards or accept that their patterns will cost them the relationship, removing their ability to blame relationship failure on incompatibility or your excessive needs. Boundaries create safety for their nervous system in ways that accommodation never can, because predictable limits provide the structure that helps them regulate their own behavior and understand the relationship's parameters. When they know that certain actions will result in specific consequences, not through your anger or punishment, but through your calm follow-through, they experience the kind of predictable structure that helps anxious nervous systems feel more secure rather than less. Your enforcement of boundaries demonstrates self-respect that models healthy relationship behavior they likely never witnessed growing up. When you value yourself enough to maintain your standards, regardless of whether they can meet them, you teach them through example that people who care about themselves don't accept treatment that violates their needs, that self-worth isn't negotiable based on someone else's capacity, and that love doesn't require self-abandonment. The limits you set paradoxically create more freedom for them than unlimited acceptance, because clear boundaries eliminate their need to constantly manage your potential reactions, or walk on eggshells wondering when you'll finally reach your breaking point. When you're clear about your limits from the beginning, they know exactly where they stand and can make informed choices about their behavior, rather than living in anxiety about when their patterns will finally exhaust your patience. Boundaries work as medicine specifically because they interrupt the enabling dynamic where your accommodation allows them to avoid confronting their patterns while still receiving relationship benefits. When you stop accepting breadcrumbs, stop making excuses for their limitations, and stop doing the relationship work for both of you, they're forced to either step up and engage differently or watch the relationship fail due to their own choices rather than external circumstances. Your calm, consistent boundary enforcement teaches them that consequences don't have to be delivered through anger, punishment, or emotional manipulation. They can be natural results of behavior that violate relationship agreements. When you simply follow through on stated consequences without drama or attacks on their character, you model mature conflict resolution they likely never experienced in their chaotic early attachment relationships. The boundaries you maintain around your own emotional energy and well-being demonstrate that healthy relationships require mutuality rather than one person's endless emotional labor. When you stop overcompensating for their emotional unavailability, stop managing their feelings about your needs, and stop accommodating their patterns at the expense of your own peace, you create conditions where they must contribute equally or accept that the relationship can't be sustained through your effort alone. The most powerful aspect of boundaries as medicine is that they force avoidance to choose. Either examine their patterns and do the work required to show up differently, or lose someone who demonstrates through their boundaries that they know their worth and won't sacrifice it indefinitely for someone who can't reciprocate basic relationship standards. This choice, presented clearly through your boundaries rather than demands for change, creates the internal pressure that might eventually motivate their healing journey. Know when to walk away, the ultimate act of love. The most difficult truth about creating conditions for avoidant healing is that sometimes the most loving thing you can do, both for them and yourself, is to completely walk away from the relationship, removing yourself so entirely from their life that they're forced to confront the reality of their patterns, destroying yet another meaningful connection without your continued presence enabling their comfortable avoidance. Walking away isn't giving up on them, it's refusing to participate in their self-destruction while protecting yourself from being collateral damage in their attachment trauma. Knowing when to walk away requires honest assessment of whether they're actually doing any work toward healing or simply enjoying the benefits of your understanding while remaining committed to their dysfunctional patterns. Are they in therapy specifically addressing their attachment issues? Are they reading, learning, and actively working to understand and change their patterns? Are they showing consistent, measurable progress over time, or are they just occasionally acknowledging their limitations while continuing the same behaviors that hurt you? The decision to leave becomes clear when you recognize that your staying has become enabling rather than supporting, when your patience allows them to avoid consequences, when your accommodation prevents them from experiencing the full impact of their patterns, when your love becomes the cushion that keeps them comfortable in their dysfunction instead of the motivation that inspires their growth. If they can maintain a relationship while doing zero personal work because you're doing all the accommodating, your presence is preventing their healing rather than facilitating it. Walking away is the ultimate act of love. When you realize that the only catalyst powerful enough to break through their denial might be losing someone genuinely valuable who loved them despite their limitations. Some avoidants will only examine their patterns after experiencing devastating loss that can't be explained away by incompatibility, bad timing, or their partner's excessive needs. Your departure done with dignity and finality might be the wake-up call that years of patient understanding never provided. The decision to leave requires recognizing when your own well-being has become so compromised by their patterns that staying constitutes self-betrayal rather than love. If you've lost yourself trying to be the perfect understanding partner, if you're constantly anxious about their moods and availability, if your self-esteem has eroded from accepting treatment that violates your needs, walking away isn't cruelty. It's necessary self-preservation and reclamation of your own life and worth. Walking away with love means you don't leave through dramatic confrontation, bitter accusations, or attempts to make them feel guilty about their patterns. You simply communicate clearly that the relationship no longer serves your well-being, that you've done everything you can to create conditions for healthy connection, and that you're choosing yourself and your future over continued participation in dynamics that damage you. This dignified departure leaves the door open for their eventual growth without sacrificing yourself on the altar of their potential. The ultimate act of love sometimes involves recognizing that you cannot save someone from themselves, cannot love someone into healing, and cannot create enough safety for someone who's fundamentally unwilling to examine their patterns and do the difficult work required to show up differently in relationships. Your leaving might be exactly what they need to hit bottom and begin their healing journey, or it might not. But either way, you've chosen your own well-being over the fantasy that your love alone could heal their attachment trauma. Knowing when to walk away includes recognizing when the relationship has become more about your hope for who they could become than appreciation for who they actually are right now. If you're staying for their potential while enduring their present reality, if you're investing in the person they promised to work on becoming while accepting treatment from the person they currently are, you're not in a real relationship. You're in a fantasy that prevents both of you from finding connections that actually work. The courage to walk away ultimately comes from understanding that leaving someone who won't do their healing work isn't abandonment. It's allowing natural consequences to motivate growth while protecting yourself from being destroyed by someone else's refusal to address their patterns. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is stop preventing them from experiencing the full weight of their choices. Stop cushioning the fall that might finally convince them to examine why they keep sabotaging meaningful connections. And stop sacrificing yourself for someone who isn't willing to sacrifice their comfort for growth.